Do you know, I fundamentally deep down, my purpose is I care to help people to help to grow themselves. I read that's fundamentally what Fig is all about. And go into an organization and say, look, what are your objectives? What are you trying to do? Where's the business going? What is the people strategy? And how are you trying to take the people on the journey to help you to achieve what you want to achieve?
To be successful as a leader, taking a growing company through that transition, you've got to do some self-reflection. You've got to open yourself. You've got to be a little bit vulnerable, because some of that stuff you might be going to be told you don't want to hear.
But unfortunately, in 2020, end of 2020, I lost my job in COVID. It was the first time I'd ever lost my job for underperformance. And I'm going to be honest, Matthew, I was devastated. You can be lost. You can feel comfortable learning from your mistakes. You can, learn how to get over the imposter syndrome. I think one of the biggest lessons, Matthew, that I learned after a little bit of bitterness was. So welcome to the very first Give a Fig show. This is a show where people are serious about leveling up and taking ownership of their development journey. So one of the things that Matthew and I have noticed as we've had this journey together over the last kind of 6 months is there are a lot of leaders out there, a lot of founders, leaders, managers that get put in a particular position, and I'm including myself here, I'm being a vulnerable leader, who actually find themselves in a situation where they may have certain skills deficits. They may have a confidence issue. They may feel imposter syndrome. Matthew, what you and I wanted to do today was to obviously start sharing our stories about how we are trying to overcome those gaps and deficits to become the leader that our business requires us to be. So Matthew, why don't we just start off and introduce ourselves? Why don't you start off and tell us a little bit about your background, who you are,
of course.
What brought you and I together?
So where did I start? Well, I've been working in learning and development for about 15 to 20 years now, which is a really strange number to think about, actually, which is pretty well got kind of a grey beard growing. But I've been working in head of L&D, mainly tech companies, very large organizations and some small organizations. And I've worked in lots of different countries. I've had that privilege to work in lots of different countries around the world. And in most of those companies, I've had to create and I've had to build something new, brand new, or I've had to come in, take a look and change what has been in place in terms of learning in organizations. So I'd love to maybe a little bit later on tell you about those transitions, because that's all about change and transition. But I'm based in the UK, as you know, but no one else knows. Jonathan, six months ago, the situation arose where I was leaving my organization because I wanted to move the role and so on and so forth. And so what I did was transition, and I transitioned into doing something I've always dreamt of doing, which is setting up my own company, being my own boss, making my own really big decisions, as well as taking on marketing, sales, accounting, sending out invoices, and all that kind of stuff as well. And so, again, I'd love to share some of those transitions with you today.
Awesome. And obviously, like it was very fortuitous that our two worlds collided, because you used to be a customer, my biggest customer, for Fig Learning. So that's where our relationship started. And obviously, when your situation, for better, for worse. And then, so we found ourselves in the situation of where, I saw very quickly the expertise that you had would bring value to my customers. And it has been the case since we started off a leadership program, and now moving on to workshops of where we help people do communication, productivity, leadership training, etc. So for me, I always call you this. You are my expert. I know it makes you sound old, Matthew. That's fine. We're going to be okay. But I love that. And I think one of the things that I'm really excited by is obviously learning from you on the journey that I'm currently going on to, and that transition, as I transition, obviously continue to transition into that leadership role.
It's really interesting, actually, that earlier on you used the phrase imposter syndrome, and you calling me an expert, who I'm instantly feeling as though I'm a bit of an imposter here because the word expert, wow, is that really me? Have I got that kind of experience? Um, would my mum
So
and dad allow
interesting.
me to call myself an expert?
Oh,
Spell
funny.
with them knowing what I do. So I'm already in that mindset of, do I belong here as an expert? So I'm going to share some things, just some experiences with you, mistakes, some good stuff as well. That hopefully there'll be some great takeaways for people.
Matthew, I love that because obviously being humble, just being vulnerable in that situation. Like I look at you and you really the amount that the value that you create for our customers or the value that you create within Fig Learning, you are to me, the perception is you are an expert in your craft. But it's so interesting how as individuals we don't always feel that way. And it's actually very interesting if I start thinking about where my journey began, I
Yeah,
used to have
tell us about
I
you
had
because yeah, because
well,
that's a great story. So to tell everyone about that.
oh, I mean, I think I'm very, very fortunate in the life that I've led. I actually had parents that when I was very younger really, really instilled in me that I was capable of great things. But I think obviously when you actually go into reality, you go into the real world, you realize you're not that great and you realize that life is challenging, right? And obviously when you go try and find your path, you don't always know which direction you're going in. So I actually came out of university with a chemistry degree, God knows how. And I actually worked in industry for a year in a lab, realized it wasn't right for me. Fell into recruitment because of money and the opportunity for money. And I worked in
Mm.
it for 12 years, but I realized I didn't get fulfillment from it. Yeah. And it was kind of like a journey that kind of like, oh man, it was almost like just playing itself out rather than me actually taking control. But at the beginning of 2018, I joined a wonderful organization called the Chabo, and they're one of the now to this day one of the market leading learning platforms, learning systems. It's a wonderful technology, and I really kind of honed my craft within the software world within that organization. And I started out in London, in the London office. And my wonderful wife got a job in the US. We moved across to the US together, and I moved into the US team for the Chabo. And I just continued to grow and grow and grow. And I became one of their enterprise sales reps. But unfortunately, in 2020, end of 2020, I lost my job in COVID. It was the first
Oh,
time
yeah.
I'd ever lost my job for underperformance. And I'm going to be honest, Matthew, I was devastated because I
Wow,
love the company, I love the product, love the
yeah,
people. It's fantastic.
that sounds really, really tough. Because obviously it sounds as though to get to the level you were, there was success there. There was, a numbers man, maybe relating back to the chemistry and all that.
I
I've got
think
a
so,
vision of you
actually.
in I've got a vision of you in like a white coat in a lab with sort of test tubes boiling
Oh,
over.
funny.
But anyway,
A lot of
that's
people
another
can't
show.
have that vision when they know me. A lot
Okay,
of my
that's
friends,
another
some of my
show.
friends have gone, you were a chemist? And like, yeah, yeah, yeah,
But
many moons ago.
but that is a really kind of, and maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, a traumatic, episode for you, going from the heights of kind of being a real top salesperson into not being in the organization. How people say that often we get knocked down, and we do get knocked down, but it's how you get back up is the most important thing. How did you ever get back up
Mhm.
after that?
Well, do you know, funny enough, I was actually very lucky. I was fortunate just because the idea of Fig had been in my mind for about 12 months. But, so that was like, it softened the blow. And it was kind of like my wife had said a few months earlier, as this idea started coming to fruition, she goes, "You're not going to do Fig unless you get fired." So I was like, well, if I get fired, at least I have a hedge. But let's think about the actual being fired. It's traumatic, right? And it's kind of like it's a big knock to you as an individual and the confidence that you have because you're like, I thought I was getting good at something. And there was a circumstance, which was COVID, and obviously I didn't perform in that difficult situation, and they were right to let me go, given the level of performance that I had. But I think one of the biggest lessons, Matthew, that I learned after a little bit of bitterness was you can't let your previous like issues or situations define what happens in the future, right? So you pick yourself up, as you said, but then you got to say, right, what future do I want to create? I'm not going to let that define what's going to happen going forward. And that was what drove me onto the next step.
No, that's really interesting, and I'll maybe share a story, but I'd like to dig into that just a little bit more because I've heard other people say, "Well, I focus on the future and I got back up and I didn't let things keep me down." But how? Where do you think that kind of resilience, that grit, kind of came from? Is that something that was just inside? Did it come from younger years? Was it, where did it come from to allow you to ask yourself that question and say, I'm not going to give up. I'm not going to stop. I'm going to get right back up again and go again.
That's a great question. And as you're asking that, when you think about something like grit, I think grit is one of those attributes that is kind of like, are you born with it? Is it something that you actually kind of like, you have a certain level of grit? And I think for anybody who wants to start a company, you have to have that. I think we all have this perception of like, these people who sell companies for tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. But how do people actually get there is so few and far between. The majority of business owners really have to wade through a lot of worries and emotional turmoil and challenges on a day-to-day basis. And I think it's one of those things that I was born with an ethic that I just literally, I came to my desk, I set myself certain challenges, and I just worked. And I just wanted to put the time and effort in because I wanted to be, I had this vision of what I could be, and I hadn't quite made it yet, and I wanted to get there.
So very interesting. So it sounds as though some sort of, like some kind of environmental influences there upon you, because I think maybe it's dare I say, a generational thing. I hope no one's watching this now throwing stuff at the screen with that slightly contentious point there. But I wonder if there is a generational difference. Maybe I'll let the audience
Yeah,
ponder that one
yeah.
as we move forward, if they're still listening. In terms of where you are now, and in terms of putting, Fig together, your first kind of 3 or 4, maybe 6 months, what other were there other occasions within that time period where you really had to dig down into that grit and see yourself keeping going forward?
Yeah, I think honestly, I was so keen to make something, to develop something, to create something. And interesting, I say to my wife this actually now. I think when I was younger, I loved Lego. I loved building stuff. I loved creating stuff. And I think a large part of when I first started building the business, I was like, oh my God, this is actually like, you're building something that's of value. You're building something that, you want to go and help somebody to do a certain thing. And actually, if you look at the business of Fig, so if I just talk about very quickly, like in terms of what it is, I think everything that's happened in the past of my life led me to this point of where I created something so that what I went through, hopefully I can prevent other people having that same experience. So what I really wanted to do was to create a company where, Fig Learning, it's a learning technology and service provider for small and medium businesses. So what I saw when I was at the chamber was that there was a lot of smaller businesses that didn't have the resources that larger organizations had. They didn't have access to the technology. They didn't have the time and understanding to be able to optimize the use of that technology. And they didn't have the expertise to be able to create real learning programs of value. And actually, fundamentally, what I really wanted to do was to go, right, there must be at least 10 or 50 people within that organization that's having my situation, where they want to try and level themselves up. They may have had a certain path that they took, and they went down a different path, because obviously, like me doing chemistry and now being me being software sales or a CEO, I wanted to continue learning. I wanted to give those people who didn't necessarily have the resources previously to have access to those resources. But there are also people in the organization who are exceptional. How do we then help them to continue to grow and to influence and to inspire? And I think when I created Fig, what became very evident very quickly is there are certain pockets within the organization where you can really help, and leadership development or management development, which is one of those things.
Great. So I've just got a couple of thoughts there as you were talking. First of all, hopefully we saw what is it called? Fig, by the way.
I think I was very lucky. I was looking for I actually wanted to call it pineapple learning at the beginning because it was kind of like mine and my wife's fruit. We had like a pineapple on our wedding invitations and stuff, like hospitality and all that kind of stuff. Uh, and then pineapple learning was taken. So I had to look through all the different fruit. And funnily enough, fig symbolized co-creation, abundance, the wanted to seek knowledge and understand. It just symbolized something that felt like is what I was trying to create. And then also somebody at a later date said to me, he goes, you've chosen the fig, but did you know that figs blossom from the inside? I was like, no. And he goes, well, think about that. You got a fruit that's blossoming from the inside. Isn't that the same as organizations? Don't they blossom from the inside? Don't they get information and knowledge and they go out and they come back in? And you look at the logo, that's what that's trying to symbolize. It's an organization blossoming from the inside.
Wow.
Pretty cool.
If you'd have gone to an advertising agency, they'd have charged you thousands for that.
I know. I was so lucky.
And you should pretend you came up with it completely. Don't say the bit about the mate thing.
I know.
Thanks for that. That's really interesting. It's almost like it was meant to be. Fate drew you towards another fruit.
I think so.
Sorry, fruit has just got in the way there. No, second question, or the second observation I have from what you were talking there, even when you were going back to, being a child with your Lego, your chemistry, which is very kind of, rational kind of structure to it. All the way through that, though, you seem very purpose-driven. The purpose in terms of building value for whatever that might be. Well, that's a really interesting thing, isn't it? Because, I'd worked for some really large organizations where I've got a kind of a purpose and understand that for my part of the organization, but not maybe for the full organization. And maybe that's because there have been instances where I've transitioned, I've left an organization because it's not quite meeting my values. It's not really keeping me excited. And I think actually listening to you has made some connections for me in terms of maybe there was something about not really tying into that purpose. What do you think?
Do you know, I fundamentally deep down, my purpose is I care to help people to help to grow themselves. I read that's fundamentally what Fig is all about. We really do care. And if you look at like a lot of software companies, and this is not every software company, but a software company, when you've got like a recurring revenue model, you can just sell a product and somebody's got to go and use that product and learn how to use it. But really what I wanted to do was come at it from a different angle and go into an organization and say, look, what are your objectives? What are you trying to do? Where's the business going? And what is the people strategy? And how are you trying to take the people on the journey to help you to achieve what you want to achieve? And this is one of the things that you and I have really kind of like spoken about so much over the last 6 months is how do we help people to unpack those different things? So when you talk about value, I think learning, the most valuable learning really comes from when you understand where is the business going and how can the people strategy help you go on that journey. And one of the things obviously that you and I have been thinking about a lot recently, if you think about the employee life cycle, from the moment you're trying to attract somebody into the business to onboarding them, to developing them, to helping them with performance, to rewarding them, whatever that employee cycle will be, how do we use learning and development to influence each of those different stages? And I'm really passionate about that. I really want to help companies to be able to do that better.
And it's interesting because coming from my angle of having worked in some very large organizations, so being part of that kind of employee life cycle, it's not necessarily something that maybe when you're in it, you get a view of the whole thing because you're just working on and maybe that links back to what I was just saying. about purpose in what I was doing, but not necessarily the whole kind of employee life cycle, as you put it. And I think there's a whole piece of work I know, which is what we're working on and what we're creating and providing value at each point. Because before I was just focusing on one point, which was the kind of the development piece. Yes, there were kind of a few dotted lines elsewhere, but predominantly I was focused on that development point. So some very interesting connections there.
But one of the observations that you gave to me, Matthew, actually
Mm.
a few weeks ago, and I love this. Just please allude to this. So when you think about a smaller business, because you worked at larger organizations, let's say organizations between typically 2 to 5,000 employees.
Yeah.
And now with Big Learning, we're typically dealing with companies that are less than 2,000 employees, with a couple of outliers. But what we were trying the other day is obviously like most smaller organizations will have a more operational approach to
Yes.
HR,
Mm.
and therefore the strategic side of things, the learning side of things, won't necessarily come into consideration. Just allude on that, because
Quite
I
right.
love that conversation you were speaking about the other day.
Yeah. So, with the small organizations, you have, maybe one kind of HR person, or maybe a couple of people, or someone having to do the job on top of their other job. And as an organization gets larger, obviously they need to scale, but people still need to get paid. People still need to be recruited and brought into the company. People still need to be given a laptop. It's all of those very, very operational and very tactical things that people who have a kind of a HR hat on get pulled into. And so therefore, it probably isn't time to do any training and development. There just isn't time. They'd love to, because that's why they're working in HR. They kind of working with people and kind of getting stuff done and seeing people grow. But because of the transactional side of things, because it's really important, like getting paid is kind of quite important. Um, then the kind of the more strategic, the planning takes an aside. And I think those smaller HR teams kind of get also wound because they haven't had time and maybe a budget to spend on producing and developing great managers and great leaders. It comes back to bite them, because then you have managers who may not want to be a manager in the first place, because it was like, well, I was a developer, now I'm a people manager. Can't I just keep doing the developing? And they're having to clear things up. They're having to, where mistakes are happening, where issues are arising, they're having to, the HR person is having to pick that up, because they just haven't got time to be dealing and developing people, even getting managers, saying to people, individual contributors, have you ever thought of being a manager? Do you know what it is to be a manager at this particular company? And getting them ready, seeing them as a new manager through their first 3 to 6 months and beyond. And I think it's a real problem. And I know we've created, solutions for that to help that size HR team, or whoever is looking after the people side, to get real value as they scale.
Do you know, one of the biggest challenges that we see in what we do is actually convincing executives of the value that learning and development can bring to an organization, which is so interesting. So if we actually think about it from, yeah, but think about it, it is hard. But think about it from like, okay, so I'm a CEO. We're both in senior leadership positions. But if we are not going to be saying, look, I feel I'm a vulnerable leader. I don't know everything. I need to learn to continue to grow. And so, but so why do HR people have to go into these executive teams and say, hey, look, we have to convince you to go and spend X number of $1,000s to invest into your organization, or to the people strategy? It just doesn't really, to us, given where we're coming from, to make sense that much. So we want to try and help leaders to self-reflect, to understand that if they can develop themselves with the value of training and development, then they can obviously then go and put it across to the rest of their organization. And that's really what the mission that you and I are on, is to learn ourselves and to help them to see the value that they can bring to their organization.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, what's the first thing that gets cut, or maybe the second thing that gets cut when there's a when there's an issue that within the market, it's normally training gets slashed or marketing. Not quite so much these days, marketing, because they can put some numbers to their investment now.
Good at telling a story.
There are some very clever people working in marketing. And so therefore, if an organization hasn't linked or hasn't taken its goals, objectives, its vision for the next year, 3 years, 5 years, and then thought, well, what people do we need? What skills do those people need to be giving us the numbers, bringing in the work, selling, producing the product? What you find is that some companies are very detached. You have your business goals, your business plan, and never the twain shall meet in terms of a training plan and a business plan. And therefore, when someone goes and asks or looks to get some money to do some training because they think they know, they're on the ground working with managers and individual contributors, the execs will quite rightly turn around and say, what difference will this make to the business? What will it give me back or us back? So, well, people like training, it makes it feel good, all that kind of rubbish. And so, well, it's not quite rubbish, but there's an inkling of engagement there. But if they were only to take time, if they had the time, if they had the solution and the resource, they would be making sure that the business plan, the training plan, whatever terminology you want to use, was aligned. So therefore, to make an acquisition, to build a new product, to go into a new market, whatever it might be, that needs a human interaction. That means human input to it, whatever it is at some point. Do you have the right people to do that stuff? Do you go and buy it? Really expensive. Go and buy it. Or do you develop people internally? Okay, it depends on the timescale. But that's where this conversation hopefully is getting across, that if those conversations are, and those bits of paper or wherever they are, the plans are joined and aligned, then there's much more chance of seeking investment for development going forward. But people don't have the time. It's a kind of is it called a self-fulfilling prophecy? That's the posh word, isn't it? I don't know whether that's right.
Yeah.
It's a circle anyway. You sort of do a circle then.
But I think so. So if we think about this, we obviously have gone down the path there of talking about HR people and obviously and how they can potentially go and conjure up the business case inside of an organization. But if we let's bring it back to the leader and what and let's take us on a journey of where we're going to share. We know about each other now. We know about obviously what we're trying to do as an organization. But Jonathan, as the CEO of FIG, is an honest, vulnerable leader, right? I know that I have deficits. But one thing I will say, Matthew, is the journey that I've been on has shaped the person I am today. The experiences that I've had, the different countries that I've lived in, the being let go of certain companies, has defined who Jonathan is today. And I've learned some really valuable lessons that's brought me to this point, right? I understand that very few people have it figured out, Matthew. I thought when I was let's say 25 or 30, that the same people are just going through life and they're making lots of money and they know where they're going. And you realize when I'm now in my early 40s, you're like, they don't. People don't have it figured out. And that's the key thing to understand, right?
Yeah, I think there are some really important phrases that you use there, like vulnerability. Sometimes leaders aren't vulnerable. Leaders, and particularly for startups, right? When do you have time to be vulnerable, particularly when you're kind of maybe seeking investment or whatever it might be, or just get the stuff out the door.
Growing at a ridiculous rate.
When you're growing at such a massive rate, you're getting people in the door, you're creating product, you're getting it out. Do you have the time to sit and reflect? You sit on your beanbag and think about yourself and where you're going. Typically not. And also, I think, some of the most successful companies I've worked for have had leaders who expect those people around them to give them feedback and to be honest. There are lots of people who think a career is nodding at the chief, at the founder, whatever it might be. And sometimes, let's be real with that, doesn't work. Pushing back against someone. But the most successful companies, you will have people, leaders, who need people around them who are going to tell them how it is, rather than people who are going to cower to them, agree with everything that they say. Where does innovation come from? Where does new ideas come from if we just agree with everything that someone has said? So I think giving people the time, particularly new leaders, founders, a time to just press a little pause button and go, okay, where am I now? More and more importantly, where do I need to get to? So where's the company going? And in that journey, what kind of leader do I need to be? That is and that doesn't take too long, but maybe the bit where I want to get to takes a bit of time. But there are all kinds of things that again, we can help new leaders and founders with, around just having that conversation, around stopping, pausing. Where do you need to get to? What does the company need from you? What kind of leader does the company in 2 or 3 years need to be successful? Let's just talk about that. Where are you now? And therefore, let's fill the gap in. So what do you need to be working on? Have you,
Love.
as a founder or CEO or leader, ever asked anybody for some feedback without saying the terrible phrase of, "Hey, can you give me some feedback?" Which is, you're wonderful. What an amazing person you are. And it's, as we know, it's got to be specific. So I think, to establish that, to be successful as a leader, taking a growing company through that transition, you've got to do some self-reflection. You've got to open yourself. You've got to be a little bit vulnerable, because some of that stuff you might be going to be told you don't want to hear. But how do we develop as human beings? One of the most important ways of developing, I feel, after 15, 20 years of doing it, is to ask for feedback and get feedback and deliver feedback to people as well. That's how you really know. But to be able to do that, there's a little precursor. And the precursor to that is by having an environment in which, a psychologically safe environment where people have trust in you, you trust them, to tell you not what you want to know, but what you need to know. And I think once you kind of shake that all off in terms of the feedback, I think it's a clearer path to the future. It's a clearer transition, a clearer journey. May not be an easy journey, but a clearer journey for people to go on.
Man, so I think the self-reflecting part you just said there is so important. And that's the stage that you and I have been discussing that I'm at right now, right? So all these different things that you just spoke about before, whether it's feedback, psychological safety, building a strong team, none of that can happen unless you go, where am I at right now? And as I was discussing with you over the last couple of days, like, things been going now for maybe 4 years in January. And I've built this, great product that really kind of like creates value amongst my customers. But that's just one part of it. And now, like I was saying before, Matthew, I've somehow amassed an incredible team. I brought people in with different skill sets. I've got, Katie, who is a wonderful technical resource. She understands the product inside out, but she's so methodical. She's so organized, and she really onboards and supports our customers incredibly well. And she's the reason, one of the main reasons why, as to why we are as successful as we are today. I brought you into the fray now in terms of, creating value from a facilitated training perspective, really taking it away from just e-learning, but going into something that is more of a holistic solution, a one-stop shop learning resource for small organizations. And I've also got a couple of sales guy, and I've got a great customer success person. So right now, what does the business need? The business needs less somebody who can build a product, but it now needs somebody that can lead the business forward and can go through that growth, take it through the growth phase. And I've said to you, I'll be honest, there's a lot of parts of leadership that I'm actually very apprehensive of. I'm actually scared of because I've never done it before. And that's what we're going to cover during this show over the next few weeks, is to go, right, Jonathan, I know where I'm at. And then now let's go through step by step the different things that we need to go through so that Jonathan can be the leader the business needs him to be. The team needs him to be. And that's what you and I are going to go embark on for this journey now.
Well, we got a great foundation because you're full of grit and all of that stuff as well.
Determined.
Oh my gosh, determined. And you've got grit. Just if in the next episode, if you could wear a white scientific jacket, that would be much appreciated.
I don't even know where that is. Well, it's probably somewhere around, but given the fact I move countries now so often, I don't know where it would have ended up.
Great.
So Matthew, just very quickly, so one of the things that we have just discussed there, obviously, is that self-awareness piece. Just very quickly, in terms of the mindset shift, that's probably the most important part that I really wanted just to discuss today. Do you feel, given your experience, that making that transition, what are the actual mindset shift things that I should be thinking about now as I start embarking on the next phase, the growth phase of the business?
I think one of the main ones is about having to let go. Now, as you and as other kind of founders of small organizations, you've done everything. You still do most stuff as well. So there will be a point where you've got to let some of that stuff go. Now, some of it you'll probably be very pleased to let go. But I'm just thinking that as you were talking there about your transition, some of the characteristics sound a lot like other transitions, right? So if you're going from an individual contributor to being a new manager, you've got to leave stuff behind. You can't, if you're a software developer, you can't be coding for 7 hours now. You've got to manage people. And it's the same for you as well. Maybe it's control, about letting go of a bit of control over different aspects of the business. And and we'll talk about this in future episodes, do you have the right people, enough of the right people, to be kind of handing those things over that you've worked on yourself and have been in total control over for the past few years? That can be very, very tough for people. And that is a real test when it comes back to what I was talking about, which is around trust and around being able to delegate things to other people as well, particularly if it's not done in your way that you would have done it for the past few years, or how people's different working style, they come to solving a problem or talking to a customer or putting out some marketing or whatever it is. If they don't come to the solution in your way, that will be a good test to see how you react and whether or not you go back into, let me just do it. Or, those types of things, which probably, go through all of our heads before we learn how to let go a bit. And so I think we're going to be focusing on that. We're going to be focusing on that.
Yeah, I've definitely, all those things that you just mentioned there, I've definitely done a lot. And it's actually, you'll know this now, obviously, with recent conversations, I'm about to let go of what has been my life for a very long time, which is the sales part of the business. I'm letting go of sales is obviously now, it's one of the most critical things of the business. If I'm not bringing in revenue, the business obviously ceases to exist. So obviously relieving myself of that responsibility is going to be a real difficult one. But it's not just that. It's like, I've done this for so long now, and having the conversations with people and being able to sell Fig or being able to talk about learning technologies and the value that it brings to an organization. I've now got to give that to somebody else. But I feel like I'm ready. I feel like over the last few months, my mindset is shifting towards going away from self to now how do I create an environment where my team can flourish and be their most successful selves. And I want to create an environment where they do feel like I trust them to do the thing that they want to do. And I've had a good experience with Katie, who I mentioned before. Katie's been that actually God sent to me, because I've never been on the customer side in previous roles or previous experiences. And she's come in and totally taken control of that, which is what I needed. So I've had experience, but now I've got to let go of one of my babies, which is the sales side. So we shall see over time how I fare.
So just one of the other things I was thinking when you were talking about there was, we also need to map out, what are you going to be doing then? If you're going to be letting go of stuff, which is good, what are you going to be doing? What does a leader do then? And what does the leader in Fig need to be doing over the next year or so? So I think in future episodes, we need to map some of that out as well, because you can let go. It's a little bit easier to let go if you're really clear on what you should be doing. So we need to map that out.
Yeah, that's a great point. There's always plenty to do. And obviously, as the CEO, it's one of those things where you run towards the biggest fires.
Yes.
And the biggest fires right now for me is demand generation. You can create the most wonderful product, but if nobody knows about it, and nobody's ever going to come and buy it. Now we've been very lucky that our customers have stuck around, and we've grown a lot of our customers and expanded them. But I want to now share the wonderful experience that we've had with the world, and also to discuss obviously our journey, our experience through leadership, etc. That's obviously a wonderful thing that we can take to the world. And that is now one of the biggest things that we're going to be doing going forward. So I'm really excited for that next phase, to be proud of where we brought the company to share that with the world, but then also now to give the people, to support the people to become the best versions of themselves too, my employees. And that's just two wonderful things that I'm excited to embark on.
Well, these the future sessions, I think, are going to be great, because to use the phrase of our show here, it sounds like you give a fig, to be quite honest.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more fig you give, is that a phrase? The more fig you give, I think the easier this will be.
Yeah.
So let's
give
give a fig together.
Oh, absolutely. And that's the point here. Like, I hope people gravitate towards, you can be lost. You can feel comfortable learning from your mistakes. You can, learn how to get over the imposter syndrome. But just a couple of the topics you've spoken about, some of the things that we're going to be touching on at a later date, but just to give people an idea of flavor for what's to come. Things along the lines of, what are the different leadership styles? How can you, jump between one and two depending on the situation that you're in? How do you understand personality types? How can you build really strong relationships within an organization? How can you, better communicate with people through active listening or giving and receiving feedback? How do you make good decisions at difficult times and prioritize the right things? These are just a couple of things that we're going to touch on in the next few weeks, and there's a lot more to come. But I want you all to understand that Jonathan, as a CEO of Fig, is going to learn a lot on this journey as we learn from Matthew and his experiences. And hopefully over time, we'll see how I become a more competent leader throughout this process.
Let's go do it.
So, hey, Matthew, I'm so excited for this journey, and thank you so much for doing this with us. Hopefully that the audience will get a lot of value from it. But great first session. Thank you so much.
Yeah, great. See you soon, everyone.